Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Pinball Arcade. So I clicked on a manual button in the last recording and it launched the Internet Pinball Database, which is apparently a non-profit website from what looks like the early 90s from its design and hasn't been updated since then. Interestingly, it says it has 75,000 images. I can't figure out a way to see any of them without individually perhaps clicking on each table's name. So there's no just general load a bunch of image galleries, which I imagine they're self-hosting yet, so that would be too much for their bandwidth. And 6,450 games. So when you look at this list, there's maybe 100 tables here out of 6,000. It would be nice, theoretically, if we lived in a world where they could give me all a accurate recreation of all 6,000 of the games, because I would be more than happy to go down that path and say I want to play every single um every single pinball that existed once. Some of them are not between like Williams, Bailey, Stern, and Gottlieb though, so obviously there would be some other pinball manufacturers that existed at one point. And there is on the front page the top 10 rated solid state versus the top 10 rated electromechanical tables, and they seem to have already have gone down that list, Pinball Arcade themselves, and licensed, oh, I imagine three or just six of the top 10 electromechanical tables, and seemingly they may have licensed every single of the top 10 solid state tables on top of a whole bunch of others. So you are in a very lush position as far as selection if you spend all the money, or if you even could now spend all the money to get all these tables. Whereas I feel like even Pinball FX3's selection is going to be smaller than that. Unfortunately, there's still a lot left on the cutting room floor. We're going to do Firepower now, another 1980s game. Firepower is another classic from the design, another classic design from the king of flow, Steve Ritchie. This outer space themed table won multiple awards, including Best Producer, Best Special Effects, Best Performance. It was the first solid state uh, table to feature multi-ball and included many industry first features that would go on to become pinball standards. This included the first animated displays, first electronic multi-ball, and first to use a player-controlled lane change trademark. 17,410 units were produced for this table, which that is a very, very large number compared to a lot of the other tables. Where, remember, one of these tables that they bothered to emulate only had 600 units, and that might very well be why that table is so well received or well remembered, is that it just had that mystique of being rare. Yes, I remember this table. Firepower in particular is a pretty generic name, but it is a fairly good table. However, if you had told me that this came out the same year as Black Knight had come out, I would have not believed you, because this table really looks like a product of the 70s. So there is some inconsistency there for sure as far as design. Like, people did not move at the speed of the internet back in those days, and certainly even if one producer at Williams was stealing ideas from tables made by Stern, to pick out two names at random, it would take probably 2 to 4 years of production to make something from that stolen idea. Um, this flyer is particularly dull. Like, they didn't even know what the table was going to be when they made that first art. And then the flyer back here is somewhat interesting, but it's pointing out different things, saying A, B, C, D, E, but then feels like there should have been a third piece of paper here to point out what those were. Let's see. Lighting the in lanes, light the kickback, advanced bonus multiplier 5 times, light 2 jet bumpers, and score 550,000 points. And there's just no pro version of this mode, so all you can do is look at the attract mode. There's no good reason for these tables to not have a pro version, even if the pro version is just going to be looking at the table closer and nothing else. That should be a feature, probably not even included in the pro version, but just included in free. Honestly, Pinball Arcade, once they lost the license to the vast majority of their games, should have probably unlocked a lot of features as just a loyalty bonus to new and old customers, to have them try and bring in as many new customers as possible and try and have their game maintain relevancy. Instead, they pretty much just abandoned it and seem to have done the bare minimum. I don't know where the animated screen element is going to come into play, because I don't see on the backboard where that is. There's a center lane here that's fairly crazy. You can note here that there's 4 bumpers that are slightly offset from each other instead of 3, and the shot, the big shot here, is to go up that center lane and fire several times. But if you mess up that shot, or if you lose momentum on that shot, it is going to roll directly down the center of the lane and drain out the center. So you've got to hope that you can hit that center target and then bounce to an angle to hit a bumper to come out on either side. This is, if I recall correctly, a fairly difficult table. It is much like Gorgar too, where there's just less that's going to be going on, and the specific things you have to shoot are the things that you need to always shoot. I believe the left sinker target in particular is one focus there. If you can sink that ball and lock the ball very early on the left, on the far left, you should. Or the far right up there, that's another one you should try to lock the ball in. This table has a kickback, and they didn't even bother to mention that. This is the first table we've seen to have a kickback. And this is just a score increaser table. And we still are toggling very often between tables that have the top lanes, the top lanes lighting up versus unlighting. But yeah, there's quite a lot of empty space there on the left and in the early part of the field, the lower play field, which fits the name quite accurately, because this is definitely a table around the concept of getting those long shots, getting those difficult shots. There's just absolutely nothing in the lower play field to target. I would almost slightly complain about the artwork on the table too. The big colorful ball is fairly visually distracting. There's also a sinker target way up there at the top that you have to hit the left lane with as much power as possible. I believe now that the green arrow is flickering on the left sinker target, the ball would lock if I was able to get the ball into that. And that seems like that mostly carries over. We still don't have a ball saver feature, but we did just manage to light up ABCD because the lane select by using the flippers is now enabled. So if you can get that. Interesting. The lane select seems to only move it forward with the right flipper. It doesn't seem like it gets it. It moves it back. Interesting. So when one is lit up, the left flipper does nothing. The right flipper toggles it. That's a little weird. But, I mean, the first time anything is ever done, obviously it's not going to be completely polished. The lane changer in particular, when you have the lane so far up, works fairly well because there's very little chance that you're going to fling the ball all the way from the top of the field to the bottom of the field. There's no kickback on the right out lane, so there's still. So that's one ball locked. There's two other places where you can get a ball locked. And the one that's lit up right now is the top lock area. It does increase the odds of you getting the multiplier higher with the lane change function. But you still would have to get fairly good at using that left lane to get the ball up to the top lanes. This is a fairly precise table. It's also fairly simplistic, so it gives you that opportunity to really practice. What you're not going to see in a table like this is crazy random rewards for doing the wrong thing or not doing something that you hadn't intended to have happen. So while I may enjoy a more modern game that just randomly lets you stay in the flow of the gameplay, this is the hard work and the strategy to become a better pool table type, a better pinball player, that you should probably have. This is the fruits and vegetables type table compared to a big juicy steak type table. And that's not to say it's a bad table or a table that doesn't live on its own. It's just to say that if I was going to own a pinball table, firepower would definitely be in the list of the second or third pinball tables I would want to own, not in the list of the first pinball tables I'd like to own. Although, if somebody was giving me one for free, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, for sure. Although, frankly, even if you did get a pinball table for free, the upkeep and maintenance on that, and just the square footage of a house, like, it would be a hard justification to maintain and continue ownership of a pinball table. What they really needed to do, and I don't think that there would have been any technology that would have really allowed for this to happen, is they needed to invent some kind of Murphy bed type setup where the pinball tables had like fantastic art on the bottom of their cabinets, and the back legs were like bolted down to the floor, and then there was a counterweight that let you just tilt the entire table backwards facing upward. Then a pinball table would go vertical and take maybe 3 by 3 square feet of area, giving you a lot of extra room. Now, what is that extra room going to get you in an arcade? Not much of anything, but in a house it would make a lot of sense. And vertical space is almost always less valuable than horizontal space in storage of things. Of course, that would be more mechanics and more design. But even now, that would be great if Act Games had a way in their cabinets to have a table kind of either fold up or collapse, which honestly probably could be a lot smaller and collapsible, or swing upward, or do both. That would be impressive, to say the least. Like, even if you just got a pinball to take the same space as a arcade cabinet, then that would probably be a major improvement, because a pinball table is effectively taking up the space of 2 or 3 arcade cabinets because of its length. And we've kind of passed the point where space is at a surplus. So I would imagine arcades can't just have huge empty areas of space, or rent or buy a huge empty warehouse type area. Let's see if we can get that shot. Not trying. I've got a lot of things lit. 2 out of 3 of the multi-balls are lit. And I'm hitting the one that's not lit. We got the in lanes lit. Alright, each of the 3 multi-ball areas are now lit. So that's great. Will they stay lit for the last ball? They are lit, but it drained out. So not a bad turn. We are still trying to get the multiplier and 550,000 points. Why? What score have I scored? Wow, that is a high amount of pointage, but this might be a multi-ball scenario where as long as there's 3 balls on the table, the score multiplier is multiplied by the number of balls on the table. That is something some pinballs did. So if there was only 2 balls on the table, you'd get a double multiplier. Not fast enough there to light that in lane, or that top lane. I guess I'm going to start calling them top lanes. You gotta be careful about those bounces. That's how you accidentally feed your ball into the out lanes. Yeah, these out lanes are fairly brutal. They could have done some tweaks there. Of the good tables I've liked so far, this is probably the first table, or the worst table as far as the weak shots not being able to hit anything at all. It's much more around either getting a strong shot or trapping the ball and trying to line up a shot. And since I practically have an allergy to actually trying to line up shots, instead I'm just hoping for a lot of blind luck. None of the bumpers seem to be particularly well placed to bounce back up into the top lanes. So getting the lane multiplier up to 5, or the score multiplier up to 5, is going to be very contingent on how often I can get the ball up that left ramp or far right ramp. Wow, I just had a bit of a hiccup there on frame rate. I can definitely feel that. And that certainly sucks. You would want to hope that the physics were perfect. And yet, there was just another little hiccup. I've also seen this game straight up have issues with the graphics, which visual issues are way better than hiccup issues. The ball has to always work correctly. We can't have any crazy physics. We can't have wonky Goat Simulator type physics happen. I guess Goat Simulator is kind of a great example too of where physics can go wrong, and it can be funny certainly, but at a certain point Goat Simulator also is just a game developer admitting that they couldn't program the physics right and make a game. So instead they sold the bugs. They sold the game on the bugs. so what would I need to do to light that top lane? Like, and you're in a weird position now because of, if I shoot the ball and it goes to where the two other balls are locked, then it's just going to hit those balls and not do anything else. It's not going to likely score you anything or trigger anything. It's not going to release the balls or anything. So you've effectively eliminated a revenue of a source of scoring until you can trigger the multi-ball, which I'm not 100% sure how you do that. I know I've done it before because I've played this table quite a bit digitally, not in the real world. So yeah, you're just gonna hit it. This might be that you just have to lock all three to trigger the multi-ball. I don't think that's the case, but and certainly I could look up the instructions, but I'd rather just keep on playing. And there is certainly a honeymoon period of sorts with, yeah, that center lane shot might be the thing that starts the multi-ball actually. Yeah, there certainly can be a honeymoon period with pinball tables where you're getting to know the table, and although arguably you shouldn't be getting to know your spouse during your honeymoon. But so this is a tortured metaphor. But my point is, yeah, when you're new to a table, you kind of want those exciting new revelations to still be a thing. You don't want to be too much of a nerd about it and go and read all of the tips and tricks and skills. If you could even investigate that before you've ever even played the game. Particularly since you very possibly would play a pinball table and not even like it. I boned that up. Hit it one too many times. You can see the heads-up display is telling you the player and the ball number in the lower left, but then there's a pop-up ball number indicator that is a part of the universal menu that just pops up in the exact same place, which that would have been an incredibly easy thing to adjust for or fix, and they just didn't even bother to do it, or they didn't even notice that was an issue. That certainly creates a weird situation. Like, I can't assume that only one or two people made Pinball Arcade and that it was just a small indie company of one programmer. They have too much success in licensing pinball tables and actually successfully programming the physics and such. So I don't know. A lot of it just seems like a lack of interest in improvement or focus, getting better every day, as it were. There are definitely some hot spots on this table where you would want to hit the ball. You basically never want to hit the ball in the top half of a flipper, because it would at best just hit the center targets. Almost every shot needs to be in the lower half of the targets of the flippers to get you to one of the lanes. To do that in particular, this is also definitely a table I would want to favorite, but in all actuality, it's going to be fairly a lot of work to get the standard goals done if you really would want to do that. I'd like to get at least one multi-ball, but even the setup for that is kind of too much. You can pretty much assume if it hits the drop target at the top that it's going to drain out the D spot. Which, once again, that doesn't matter because you can change the lanes. They're lit. We're still running into a lot of times where the plunger just seems very wimpy. Like, they're really, compared to real world physics, should not be a single scenario where you pull the flipper all the way back and the ball goes nowhere. That's just not realistic. I'm trying to target my shots a little bit more, and that's slowing down the flow. It's kind of interesting that they describe this as a flow game, because it kind of isn't, in my book, a game about flow. Because flow, as a concept in my mind, is almost this magical, nebulous, subconscious way of playing, which definitely I feel like I'm benefited in playing pinball while talking compared to just focusing in silence and playing pinball. Like, if I am going for a subconscious flow type experience. And the arcades must agree, for most people, that is the desired way too, because if you're not talking to somebody, you are at the very least in an arcade usually listening to music or being distracted by other sound effects from other games. It is a fairly rare occurrence that you would be in a completely silent room, standing in silence playing pinball. Yeah, you can see it. It doesn't randomize the amount of force it ejects the ball with in that top area, top drop down. Whereas if it did randomize that, then it would have been a better experience. Or at least a more random experience. And I assume that's what you kind of want. Or at least that's what most people want. Maybe the pros want everything to be 100% predictable. That's kind of the same argument with collectible card games. The pros that would want to play a collectible card game would want to remove all the randomness, all the random elements out of a collectible card game. And the casuals would want more randomness so that they could potentially increase their win ratio to something above, at best, 50%. Well, that was the first time that didn't end up in the D lane. Still very easy to hit those out lanes. But you are seeing how it is very difficult to get it to give you enough opportunities to even potentially, yeah, that's a center lane drain example, to even potentially increase your multiplier to 5x. And that was like a rare example of recovering by the ball going up the out lane, and that happens a few times. And this table doesn't have a pro mode, which that seems kind of crazy. 187 instructions, being a huge commercial success. And you kind of have to wonder how much of this was a commercial success because of it being pushed more than anything. Or was this, if this came out in the 80s, was this right around the time that Star Wars was a big thing? Because this definitely looks like a Star Wars inspired table. That might be the case too, is that the massive success of Star Wars just had a knock-on effect of a unrelated pinball table. And it's not just Star Wars, like sci-fi space shooters in general, fairly popular. I suppose it is also worth mentioning that in arcades, this 80s table very possibly could have been right next to a 70s table or even a 60s table. So it's not like arcades every year got one new pinball table consistently. If anything, I definitely remember going to some arcades that basically never got a new arcade cabinet game or pinball table for what was probably 5-6 years. And nowadays, there's not too many arcades or pinball tables being made, so it would totally make sense that an arcade these days would not ever get anything new. Even or even different, let alone new. A lot of the arcades I went to just got increasingly worse as time went on, and increasingly more desperate. I know one arcade specifically just modified a coin for free. They installed buttons to trigger like you had inserted a coin for free play, which seemed completely unnecessary, frankly, because I'm fairly certain every single game they had could have just been set into a free play mode, and I don't know if they were just too dumb to figure that out or if there was an actual reason for it. But they damaged every single arcade cabinet that they had by doing that, because it wasn't like there was just a button hanging out of a pre-existing hole. They drilled a hole and installed a push button. The only reason I could think that you would want a button is if you wanted just to count how many people were still playing your cabinet. But at that point, who cares? If you're just setting everything to free play. Or, you know, it kind of doesn't make that much sense not just to give away tokens for free. That would be the easiest thing, is to that everybody gets a big bucket of tokens and they can use it however they want. Although that does then have somebody having to clean out the coin receptors and dump out the tokens back into buckets. But they pretty much had to do that in arcades in the old days anyways. So you wouldn't be adding new work, you'd just be maintaining old work. I always got the feeling that the people that were behind the counter at arcades were like college kids working for minimum wage at best, if not family members of the arcade owner working for free. But yeah, it would have been an easy job certainly to not do much work at, but also wouldn't have been a particularly financially rewarding job, I'm sure. Come on. I definitely remember hitting scenarios where I would just hit the sync targets over and over and over again on this table, and it would not do anything because it's giving you points, but that's all it can do until it's lit. So man, I gotta call this the last game. Last game. Like, I could keep on playing this. I'm out of things to say. This is a great table. You can kind of judge the quality of a table just by how much you want to keep playing it, and this is a table that I would want to keep on playing because it does have that feeling that you're just one more target away from what you need, or that you just need to do one thing. Whereas later tables, like Star Trek The Next Generation, is kind of a great example of a table that has so much going on it that to actually get to the ultimate success point, you have to do several missions. You have to start missions. You have to succeed at missions. There's just an incredible amount of stuff that you have to do in Star Trek The Next Generation that most players, including me when I was young, never stood a chance to make it to the final conflict, which I believe was either fighting the Borg or fighting Q. Q would make more sense because Q is kind of the bad guy that shows up at the beginning in the first episode and at the end of the last episode of The Next Generation, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And Q basically introduces the Borg too, although a casual observer probably would think the Borg is more interesting. Certainly I could go on a Star Trek rant about how the Borg pretty much disappeared from being interesting in all of Deep Space Nine and then got reintroduced somewhat in Voyager. And they did some stuff with the board, but Voyager at that point, it had been the fourth TV series in a series, so it had lost some momentum and kind of suffered from Deep Space Nine being something fairly different. And see, I just am jumping through all these instructions so that we can see where it would point and just look at the table. I still don't like that colorful circle though. That is a lot of ink and a lot of distraction. Clearly though, this is supposed to be inspired by the Death Star, which, if the timelines, I'm not sure they really line up here for the Death Star to show up. Do they show the Death Star in A New Hope, or do they not show the Death Star until the fifth movie, which I guess would be Revenge of the Sith or Empire Strikes Back? I don't even know the order. I'm not that big of a Star Wars fan. I guess in comparison, if you were to play the Pinball FX3 Star Wars games that are brand new, you probably would have much more of a nostalgia trip compared to playing Fireball, which only is somewhat similar to Star Wars. But I bet you wouldn't have a real pinball experience playing the virtual only Star Wars games. I did like some of the Star Wars games on Pinball FX2, so I imagine on Pinball FX3 with a better improved engine, I would like them even better. Even with 187 lines of instructions here, you can kind of see how it is just pointing at the same things over and over again, because there's actually fairly little as far as targets to hit. And then stupidly, I'm not really reading this, so I want to potentially solve one question, which is how does one start multi-ball? Multi-ball is a great way to score points on firepower. To activate it, lock 3 balls in the eject holes. I guess that's what those are called instead of sinkholes. Here and here. Complete a bank of 1 to 3 spot targets and a bank of 4 to 6 spot targets. Locks the lights at the 2 and the 3 eject holes, completing a bank of 1 to 3 spot targets and 4 to 6 spot targets. Lights the lock on the 3rd eject hole, shooting the ball until into an unlit eject hole scores 1,000 points. Locking a ball in a lit eject hole scores 10,000. Shoot balls into each of the lit eject holes to activate multi-ball. Scoring during multi-ball is the same as single ball play, but you can rack up a lot of points by just having 3 balls on the table. Multi-ball ends once 2 of the 3 balls drain. To reactivate multi-ball after the first time, each of the eject hole locks must be relit individually, completing the 1 to 3 and 4 to 6 spot targets. Alright. Okay, well, that's how you get multi-ball, and that does explain why we didn't unlock that. This icon, though, if you had told me this was firepower, I would not believe you. I thought this said Frankenstein or something, and that didn't even make sense. But also, I guess I'm playing this game 10 feet away, so it would make sense maybe if I was closer to the screen that I would be able to recognize that these I might be able to recognize icons or read. So we are up now to 4 favorite tables. And we really are not that far even into the 80s era. We are 3 tables in, and we have, let's see, 8 per row. 4, 8, 12, plus another 16 tables from the 80s eras to look at. So we are down the path of having a pretty good fun time. Is there anything else to say? I guess not. So that'll be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.